All right, buckle up, everyone. We're diving deep into a topic that never fails to capture the imagination: Martian colonization. You guys sent in a treasure trove of info, Wikipedia, some really in-depth personal notes, even a couple of YouTube videos.
Clearly, our listeners are ready to go to
They
Mars.
are. So what's the mission for this deep dive? What are we hoping to unpack?
It's like your Martian mission briefing. We'll be exploring what it would take to not just survive on Mars, but actually thrive there.
I love that. So we're going beyond just the can we and into the how,
Yeah.
and maybe even should we.
You got it. The awesome potential, the daunting obstacles, and the ethics of making Mars humanity's second home.
And judging by the sources, there are some pretty diverse opinions on all of that.
Absolutely. We've got the super enthusiastic folks like Elon Musk who see Mars as like humanity's backup plan, but also voices urging caution, really highlighting the ethical and practical complexities.
Right, right. So first things first, Mars versus Earth. How different are we talking here?
Well, for starters, picture stepping on a scale on Mars. You'd weigh about 62% less than you do here. Martian gravity, it's only about 38% of Earth's.
Wow. So I'd finally achieved my weight goals.
Exactly. And a day on Mars, they call it a sol, is a smidge longer than ours, just under 25 hours. But a Martian year, almost twice as long as an Earth year.
Whoa. Talk about a long winter.
Hmm.
But you mentioned in your notes that Mars has a more Earth-like temperature range than any other planet. But even so, it doesn't sound like the most welcoming environment.
True, that atmosphere. Super thin, mostly carbon dioxide, so no breathing that. And the temperatures, they swing wildly. You're talking bone-chilling cold. Plus, no global magnetic field to protect it from radiation like Earth has.
So constant bombardment with cosmic rays and solar flares.
Pretty much. Not exactly a walk in the park.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But even with all that, people have been fascinated by Mars forever. I was reading about how back in the 1800s, people thought they saw canals and cities on Mars through their telescopes, convinced there were Martians.
Oh, yeah, that Martian civilization idea, it's been around for ages, but now it's different. Think about the Perseverance rover. Its whole mission is searching for signs of past life. Not just could it have supported life, but did it?
Mind-blowing to think we might actually find evidence of past life on another planet.
Right. Could completely change how we understand life in the universe.
And speaking of changing our understanding, we're not just exploring remotely anymore. I mean, SpaceX, NASA, they're all talking about actually building colonies on Mars.
It's an amazing vision, but don't forget about the journey itself. It's a long haul, at least 3 months cooped up in a spacecraft, just traveling through the vastness of space.
And all that radiation we talked about, that's a huge risk for those astronauts during the trip.
Absolutely. One of the YouTube videos you sent mentioned using hydrogen-rich materials as shielding or even creating some kind of artificial magnetic field around the spacecraft.
But what are the challenges with those ideas? Are they actually feasible?
They're innovative for sure, but they come with huge hurdles. Shielding adds a lot of weight, a big problem for space launches. And generating a magnetic field strong enough to protect a whole spacecraft, that's beyond what we can do right now.
So even just getting to Mars is a monumental task. And then once we're there, we can't just pitch a tent on the surface, can we?
Nope, not quite. Before we send humans, we'll need robotic missions to prep the site. Imagine robots building habitats, setting up power, maybe even starting some basic farming. Gotta make sure there's something sustainable there before sending humans on a one-way trip.
I'm picturing robots 3D printing habitats from that Martian soil, the regolith, right? Is that actually a real possibility?
Totally. 3D printing could be a game changer for building on Mars. Using local materials instead of hauling everything from Earth, which is incredibly expensive, not to mention logistically nightmarish.
And I remember reading that those habitats would need to be buried or covered with regolith to shield them from radiation.
Right. It's like building Martian bunkers. That regolith acts as a natural radiation shield and helps regulate temperature, crucial on a planet with those wild temperature swings. But even with a super strong shelter, you can't live without breathable air. So we need to figure out how to make oxygen on Mars.
I came across a couple of methods for that. Electrolysis, using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. And then there's that MOXIE experiment, trying to pull oxygen directly from the Martian atmosphere, which is mostly carbon dioxide.
Both of those are promising, but that MOXIE experiment is pretty exciting because it uses what's already there on Mars. The goal is self-sufficiency, right?
Right. But all those systems need a reliable power source. And that's a tricky one, isn't it? Solar power, which we love here on Earth, isn't as effective on Mars.
Yeah, because Mars is farther from the sun, you get about 40% less solar intensity. Plus, those massive dust storms that can blanket the whole planet for weeks, they can completely block out the sun, making solar panels useless.
So what are the options? Nuclear power, is that a possibility on Mars?
It's definitely on the table. A small, safe nuclear reactor could provide a steady power supply, even during those dust storms. But of course, it comes with its own set of challenges and risks. We need to be super careful with that.
For sure. Okay, so we've got shelter, air, power. What about water? Where's that coming from on Mars?
You might be surprised to learn that Mars has got us covered. Literally. Tons of water ice beneath the surface, especially at the poles. Extracting and purifying it is actually pretty straightforward.
So no need to ship bottled water from Earth. That's a relief. But what about food? Can we grow anything in that Martian soil?
Now that's the billion-dollar question, literally. Martian soil, the regolith, isn't exactly fertile. It's missing organic matter and contains perchlorates, which are nasty chemicals toxic to plants and humans.
So no Martian gardens. What would it take to make that soil usable for growing food?
They need to get rid of those perchlorates. There are ways to do that. And then introduce some organic matter to enrich the soil. There's some really cool research happening right now using bacteria to break down those perchlorates and create better soil.
Wow, using bacteria to clean up the soil for us. That's incredible. What about growing things indoors, like hydroponics?
Definitely. Hydroponics, where you grow plants in nutrient-rich water, is a strong contender for Martian farming. We could also use something called aquaponics, which adds fish into the mix.
Wait, aquaponics, what's that?
Basically, you use fish waste as fertilizer for the plants, and the plants help filter the water for the fish. It's a closed-loop system, provides food, and cleans the water.
That sounds like a perfect solution for Mars. A self-sustaining ecosystem right there in the habitat. Okay, we're getting a sense of what it might take to physically survive on Mars, but what about the reality of living there long-term?
That's where the human factor comes in, and it's something we can't ignore.
Because visiting is one thing, but actually living on Mars is a whole other story.
Exactly, and that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. It takes a special kind of person, to willingly leave Earth behind, knowing they might never come back.
It does make you wonder, what would motivate someone to take on that kind of challenge?
Well, there's the allure of the unknown, right? The thrill of exploring, pushing the boundaries of what humans can do.
And I imagine a sense of purpose, too. Like these would be pioneers, the founders of a new society, writing the next chapter of human history.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember they wouldn't be starting completely from scratch. They'd be bringing the history, culture, values of Earth with them.
So it's like building a new society on Mars is a chance to reflect on who we are as humans, learn from our past, maybe strive for something better. But let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about surviving on Mars, but what about actually building a Martian society? What would that look like?
That's where it gets really interesting. We're talking about designing a civilization from the ground up. And your sources, they have some cool ideas. One that came up was intermartian trade.
Intermartian trade, you mean like different Martian settlements trading with each other?
Yeah. Exactly. Imagine settlements specializing in different things, right? One focuses on water extraction, another on agriculture, another on manufacturing. They create this network, trading essential goods and services.
That makes sense. It wouldn't be very efficient or even possible for every settlement to try and do everything themselves. So like the early colonies on Earth, they had to specialize and trade to survive.
Exactly. And this intermartian trade could help create a sense of community cooperation across the planet. But then there's the question of trade with Earth.
Now that seems a lot more complicated. Millions of miles, months of travel time. What could Mars possibly offer that would be worth the cost and effort of shipping back to Earth?
It's a good question. It might be certain rare resources that become super valuable. There's been talk of mining rare earth elements on Mars. Those are crucial for electronics, all sorts of high-tech industries here on Earth.
So instead of shipping potatoes back and forth, we might be shipping computer chips.
Maybe. And then, of course, there's the water ice itself. Could be incredibly valuable for future space missions, like a sort of interplanetary refueling station.
Okay, starting to see how a Martian economy could develop. But who would control all this? Would we have countries claiming territory on Mars or companies staking their claims?
That's a debate happening right now, no easy answers. International space law, it says countries can't claim ownership of celestial bodies, but it's less clear when it comes to private companies.
So theoretically, a company like SpaceX could just land on Mars, set up shop, and declare themselves rulers of, say, the Martian water ice industry.
Some people are definitely worried about that, and it raises all sorts of ethical questions, right?
Yeah.
About resource ownership, exploitation, potential for conflict.
A lot to think about. Seems like building a Martian society isn't just about the technical stuff. It's about how we govern ourselves, manage resources responsibly, create a fair system.
You got it. And this is where those different perspectives in your sources get interesting. Some people envision a super collaborative society on Mars, shared resources, collective decision-making.
Like a giant Martian cooperative.
Exactly. But others argue that you need some individual initiative, even competition, for a colony to really thrive. They point to, like, the history of exploration on Earth, how pioneers and entrepreneurs shaped new societies.
So maybe it's not an either thing. Maybe a successful Martian society would need a balance of both cooperation and competition, just like we have here.
Probably a delicate balance. But what's exciting is we have this chance, maybe for the first time ever, to design a society from scratch.
Right.
Learn from our past, aim for a more sustainable and just future.
It's a huge opportunity, but let's be real. There are some big risks, too. We've talked about the technical challenges, the psychological pressures, the ethical stuff. But what about the sheer danger of living on such a hostile planet?
We can't ignore that. Mars is unforgiving. Even with amazing technology, there's always the chance of accidents, equipment failures, stuff we can't predict. And remember, help is millions of miles away, months away.
So Martian colonists, they need to be ready for anything. Problem solvers, innovators, resourceful, and brave.
Absolutely. Makes you wonder what kind of society would emerge from those conditions.
Would it be a utopia, everyone working together for the common good? Or more like a Wild West, everyone scrambling for resources and power?
Impossible to know for sure. But we can look at history for clues. Like the early American colonists. Huge challenges, but they created a new nation based on freedom and self-governance.
Powerful example. But they had their share of conflicts, too.
Of course. Building a new society is never easy, but it's a chance to learn from mistakes, create something better.
You know, thinking about all this makes me wonder, are we really ready for this? Are we ready to become a multiplanetary species?
That's a question we all have to answer for ourselves. But one thing's for sure, the journey to Mars, it's as much about understanding ourselves as it is about exploring another world.
It's kind of wild to think, here we are on Earth facing all these huge issues, climate change, running low on resources, political stuff.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're talking about becoming a multiplanetary species.
Yeah, it's a pretty pivotal moment for humanity. Makes you think about some pretty big questions.
Like what kinds of questions?
Well, like what does it even mean to be human? What are our responsibilities to our planet, to each other, to future generations? And what kind of future are we trying to create? Not just for us, but for all life,
I gotta say, it's kind of overwhelming thinking about all this. It's a lot. But I'm also feeling this, strange sense of hope.
I get it. It's a lot to process. But that hope, that sense of possibility, that's what pushes us to explore, to innovate, to reach for something more. And it's that spirit that could make Martian colonization not just a scientific achievement, but a deeply human one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So where do we go from here? What's the next step on this road to Mars?
Well, we gotta keep learning. Keep exploring Mars with robots, gathering more data, improving our technology.
I keep having these conversations, right? Talking about the challenges, the ethical questions, the potential benefits and risks, figuring out what kind of future we want on Mars and here on Earth.
Absolutely. And that's where you, the listener, come in.
This isn't just a story for scientists and engineers.
It's a story for all of us.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, from the harsh realities of Mars to the mind-blowing challenge of building a whole new society.
And one theme keeps coming up.
What's that?
Just how resilient and adaptable humans are. Our ability to face these crazy obstacles and come up with solutions. And our capacity for cooperation, even when things are tough.
It's like prepping for Mars is making us take a good hard look in the mirror.
Yeah, examine our strengths, our weaknesses, our values, what we want. It all comes down to what kind of future we want to create.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with?
The future of Mars, and maybe even the future of humanity, it all hinges on the choices we make today. We have this incredible opportunity to push the limits of what humans can do, to learn from our past, and to build a future that's both sustainable and inspiring.
It's a challenge that'll take all our creativity, courage, and compassion. And it's a journey we're taking together. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of Martian colonization.